You think Appalachian mountain folk only ate chowder and beans? Think again. These rural hollers and backwoods kitchens served up some of the most ingenious, flavorful, and surprisingly sophisticated meals in American history. They're real dishes served to real families across the Appalachian Mountains, Ozarks, and rural South for generations. These recipes kept entire communities fed through the Great Depression, harsh winters, and economic hardship with nothing but cast iron skillets, foraged ingredients, and pure mountain ingenuity. Let's dig into 25 hillbilly comfort foods you never knew were actually feeding America's most resilient people from the 1800s through the 1950s. Corn pone. Starting strong. Corn pone, the bread that built the backwoods. This wasn't your grandmother's cornbread from a box mix. Travel back to the Appalachian frontier of the 1700s and 1800s, where wheat flour was a luxury most mountain families couldn't afford. Corn pone emerged as the daily bread of necessity, made from just 3 ingredients settlers always had on hand: cornmeal, water, and salt. Unlike its fancy cousin cornbread, pone required no eggs, no milk, no baking powder, nothing that required a trip to town or a cow in the yard. The preparation was beautifully simple, yet required skill. Mountain cooks mixed white or yellow cornmeal with boiling water and a pinch of salt until it formed a thick, moldable dough. They'd shape it by hand into flat, oval cakes, about the size of your palm, then slap them directly onto a greased cast-iron skillet or griddle over an open fire. The pones cooked until they developed a golden, crispy crust on the outside, while staying dense and slightly gritty on the inside. In Appalachian households, corn pone appeared at every meal. It was the plate, the utensil, and the filler all in one. Kids grew up breaking off pieces to sop up bean juice or to stretch a meager portion of meat into a full meal. Today's cornbread is corn pone's wealthy descendant, softened with buttermilk and sweetened with sugar. If you're enjoying this journey through food history, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss future videos. Spoon bread. From rough to refined. Spoon bread, the hillbilly soufflé nobody saw coming. Despite its humble origins in the 1700s Virginia and Kentucky backcountry, spoon bread represented a step up the social ladder. This dish emerged when mountain cooks figured out how to transform basic cornmeal into something cloud-like and elegant. It bridged the gap between the poorest corn pone and the wealthy plantation breads, making it a Sunday supper staple in rural households that wanted to feel a bit fancy. The magic happened in the mixing. Cooks slowly whisked cornmeal into boiling milk, creating a thick mush that looked unpromising at first. Then came the transformation. Beaten eggs folded in gently, along with butter if you had it, and a touch of baking powder. The whole mixture went into a greased baking dish and disappeared into a hot oven. What emerged 40 minutes later was nothing short of miraculous. A golden-topped, custardy, soufflé-like creation that you literally had to eat with a spoon because it was too delicate to slice. This was special occasion food. Spoon bread appeared at church suppers, holiday meals, and when the preacher came to visit. Serving it meant you had eggs, milk, and enough fuel to keep an oven hot. It's basically the ancestor of every fancy cornbread casserole you see at Thanksgiving today. Skilly skillet beans. Here's where it gets real. Skilly skillet beans, the breakfast that could fuel a 10-hour workday. In the early 1900s Appalachian Mountains, breakfast wasn't about toast and coffee. It was about loading up on calories before heading out to work a hardscrabble farm from sunup to sundown. Skilly beans emerged from this necessity. A one-skillet wonder that combined leftover beans with whatever scraps of meat and fat you had hanging around. The night before, someone soaked dried pinto or navy beans until they swelled up fat and tender. Come morning, those beans hit a cast-iron skillet along with chunks of salt pork, bacon drippings, or ham hocks if you were lucky. The cook added chopped onions, a splash of water or pot liquor, and let everything simmer and bubble until the beans broke down into a thick, stew-like consistency. The result was a hearty, smoky, stick-to-your-ribs mixture that had a silky texture from the rendered pork fat coating every bean. Mountain families ate this straight from the skillet, using corn pone or biscuits to scoop it up. It wasn't pretty, but it kept coal miners, loggers, and farmers moving through brutal physical labor. Modern baked beans are the sanitized, sweetened descendant that forgot what real hunger tastes like. Biscuits and sawmill gravy. Nothing says hillbilly breakfast like biscuits and sawmill gravy, the meal that turned flour and grease into pure comfort. This combination exploded in popularity during the late 1800s in logging camps across the Appalachian South. Sawmill gravy got its name from the lumber mill workers who needed massive amounts of cheap, filling food to get through 12-hour shifts. The gravy contained no meat, just the rendered fat left in the pan after frying salt pork or sausage, combined with flour and milk to create something filling from almost nothing. The process was pure alchemy. After frying up breakfast meat, cooks left the drippings in the cast-iron skillet and sprinkled in flour, stirring constantly until it formed a blonde roux that smelled nutty and rich. Then came the milk, poured in slowly while whisking to prevent lumps, until the gravy thickened to a consistency that could coat a spoon. Heavy-handed amounts of black pepper and salt finished it off, creating a thick, peppery, creamy gravy that could drown a plate of biscuits. Those biscuits were no joke either, made from soft wheat flour, lard, and buttermilk, then baked until golden with crispy bottoms and fluffy interiors that could soak up gravy like a sponge. This was poverty food that tasted like wealth. Every diner in the South still serves this because it's that good. Red-eye gravy. But here's where gravy gets weird. Red-eye gravy, the coffee-spiked concoction that sounds wrong until you taste it. Born in the 1800s, rural South, red-eye gravy emerged from the same waste-nothing philosophy that defined hillbilly cooking. The story goes that a cook, some say it was for Andrew Jackson, fried up country ham for breakfast, and instead of discarding the drippings and fond stuck to the pan, they deglazed it with black coffee. What resulted was a thin, reddish-brown gravy with a mysterious sheen that looked like a bloodshot eye staring up from the plate, hence the name. The technique was simple but required good ingredients. You started with genuine country ham, that salty, aged, intensely flavored ham that mountain families hung in smokehouses. After frying thick slices until the edges crisped up, you poured strong black coffee directly into the hot skillet. The liquid hissed and bubbled, scraping up all those caramelized, salty bits clinging to the cast iron. Some cooks added a touch of brown sugar or molasses to balance the bitterness, creating a thin gravy that was simultaneously salty, bitter, sweet, and smoky. You didn't smother biscuits with red-eye gravy. You drizzled it alongside ham, letting it pool on the plate for dipping. Modern Southerners either love it or find it baffling. There's no middle ground. Burgoo. Next up, burgoo, the communal stew that could feed an entire hollow. This wasn't just food, it was a social event. Dating back to the early 1800s in Kentucky and throughout Appalachia, burgoo was traditionally made in massive iron kettles for church gatherings, political rallies, and barn raisings. The recipe varied wildly because burgoo was fundamentally a throw-in-whatever-you've-got stew. But the common thread was cooking it low and slow for hours until every ingredient surrendered to a thick, hearty, almost chowder-like consistency. A traditional burgoo started with a whole assortment of meats: squirrel, rabbit, chicken, mutton, pork, whatever was available. These went into a giant pot with water and simmered for hours until the meat fell off the bones. Then came the vegetables: corn kernels, lima beans, potatoes, tomatoes, okra, and onions all joined the party. The whole mixture cooked down until it became thick enough to coat a wooden spoon, developing deep, complex flavors that married together into something greater than the sum of its parts. Heavy seasoning with salt, pepper, and cayenne gave it a spicy kick that woke up your taste buds. Burgoo meant community. One family couldn't eat a whole kettle, so these gatherings brought everyone together, stirring the pot in shifts and arguing about whose burgoo recipe was superior. It's the original meal prep, mountain style. Chowder beans. Chowder beans. Not a chowder, not quite a soup, but something uniquely Appalachian that kept families full through long winters. This dish emerged in the early 1900s mountain communities, where dried beans represented survival itself. Families stored them by the bushel because beans kept forever, provided protein, and could stretch to feed however many mouths showed up at supper time. Chowder beans took the basic bean pot concept and elevated it with a creamy, almost bisque-like consistency that felt luxurious despite being fundamentally poverty food. The preparation required patience. Great Northern or navy beans soaked overnight, then went into a heavy pot with water, a ham bone or salt pork for flavor, and chopped onions. But here's what made them chowder beans. After hours of slow cooking, the cook would mash about half the beans against the side of the pot, releasing their starch and creating a thick, creamy base while leaving the rest whole for texture. Some added milk or cream at the end if the cow had been generous, along with butter and black pepper. The result was a velvety, rich bean stew that coated your spoon and filled your belly with warmth. Mountain families served this with corn pone for dipping, creating a complete protein meal from ingredients that cost almost nothing. It's comfort in a bowl, made from what grows in dirt. Snowball Salad. Now for something completely different. Snowball Salad, the wobbly white mystery that graced every church potluck. Emerging in the 1920s and hitting peak popularity in the 1940s through 1960s, Snowball Salad represented hillbilly households reaching for sophistication with limited means. This wasn't a salad in any reasonable sense. It was a sweetened cottage cheese and whipped cream concoction that got molded into balls or mounds and rolled in coconut. The visual was pure mid-century peculiarity. White spheres that looked like they belonged in a snowball fight, not on a dinner plate. The construction was simple, but required specific ingredients that mountain families saved for special occasions. You mixed cottage cheese with crushed pineapple, a packet of lemon jello powder, and whipped cream or Cool Whip once that became available. Some versions added mini marshmallows for extra sweetness and texture. The mixture got shaped into balls or scooped into mounds, then rolled liberally in shredded coconut until they looked like fuzzy snowballs. The whole creation chilled in the icebox until firm. This appeared at every wedding shower, funeral reception, and holiday gathering. Serving it meant you were civilized enough to make fancy food, even if fancy meant combining grocery store shortcuts into something that confused the definition of salad. It's basically a time capsule of post-war American food culture meeting Appalachian hospitality. Tomato aspic. Speaking of gelatin confusion, tomato aspic, the savory jello that horrifies modern eaters, but was serious business in the hollers. Aspic hit Appalachian tables in the 1930s through 1950s when gelatin became affordable and represented modern convenience. Unlike the sweet jello molds that became famous, tomato aspic was aggressively savory, made from tomato juice, unflavored gelatin, and enough vinegar and seasoning to wake the dead. Mountain women served this at church suppers and special occasions to prove they could make fancy food like the city folk did. The preparation was precise. Tomato juice got heated with celery, onion, bay leaves, and sometimes Worcestershire sauce, creating an intensely flavored base. Unflavored gelatin dissolved in cold water, then mixed into the hot tomato mixture along with lemon juice or vinegar for brightness. Some cooks added finely chopped vegetables like celery or olives for texture. The mixture went into a mold, often a fancy ring mold if you had one, and chilled for hours until it set into a firm, jiggly, translucent red mold that caught the light like a jewel. You unmolded it onto a plate lined with lettuce and served slices as a side dish. The texture was slippery smooth but firm, the flavor acidic and intensely tomato-forward with herbal notes. Today's generation can't fathom eating savory jello, but back then it was elegance on a budget. Fried apple fritters. Let's sweeten things up. Fried apple fritters, the dessert that turned fall's apple harvest into crispy, sugary heaven. Throughout the Appalachian region, where apple orchards clung to hillsides, families needed ways to use up bushels of apples before they spoiled. Fried apple fritters emerged as a special treat, especially during the fall harvest season and winter holidays. These weren't the modern yeast-risen donuts. These were quick, rustic, and fried in cast-iron skillets over wood stoves, filling the house with the smell of cinnamon and hot oil. The batter was simple: flour, eggs, milk, and baking powder mixed until just combined, then studded with diced apples that had been tossed in cinnamon and sugar. Some cooks added a splash of vanilla or a pinch of nutmeg if they had it. Spoonfuls of this chunky batter dropped into hot lard or shortening, sizzling and puffing up into irregular golden mounds. The outside fried crispy and caramelized, while the inside stayed soft, with tender apple pieces that turned jammy and sweet from the heat. Once drained on newspaper or brown paper, they got dusted with powdered sugar or drizzled with a simple glaze. Families made these for breakfast on special occasions or as an afternoon snack when company came calling. Kids would hover around the stove, waiting to snag them while still warm. They're basically the ancestor of every apple fritter at your local donut shop. Fried bologna sandwich. Here's where hillbilly cuisine gets unapologetically simple. The fried bologna sandwich, the lunch that defined working-class childhoods. Starting in the 1920s and exploding in popularity through the Depression and post-war years, the fried bologna sandwich became a staple in lunch pails, school cafeterias, and after-school snacks across rural America. Bologna was cheap, kept forever without refrigeration, and could be bought by the chub at the general store. Frying it transformed this humble lunch meat into something special. The technique made all the difference. You sliced bologna about a quarter-inch thick enough to get a good sear, but thin enough to cook through. The slice hit a hot skillet with maybe a little butter or bacon grease, and here's where the magic happened. The bologna would curl up and puff in the center as it fried, creating a bowl shape. The edges got crispy and almost burnt, while the center stayed tender and juicy. Some folks scored an X in the middle to prevent extreme curling. That fried slice went straight onto white bread, usually Wonder Bread or similar, with yellow mustard, maybe a slice of American cheese if you were feeling fancy, and that was lunch. The crispy edges had an almost bacon-like texture, while the meaty center was rich, salty, and satisfying. Kids traded these at lunch like currency. It's working-class nostalgia you can still make for under $2. Sardines and crackers. Even simpler, sardines and crackers, the meal that required zero cooking and zero apology. From the 1920s through the 1960s, canned sardines were a staple in Appalachian pantries because they were cheap, shelf-stable, and packed with protein and fat that working bodies needed. Mountain men kept tins in their lunch pails for mining or logging work, and families kept them stocked for quick suppers when time or money ran short. This wasn't fancy eating. It was fuel. Opening a tin of sardines was an experience in itself. That key rolled back the lid, revealing small fish packed in oil or mustard sauce, their silvery skins glistening. The smell was intense, briny, fishy, and unmistakable. You'd fork out those tiny fish directly onto saltine crackers, which would absorb the oil and get slightly soggy. Some folks mashed the sardines with a fork, mixing in a bit of the oil and adding hot sauce or vinegar for a spread. Others ate them whole, bones and all, which provided calcium along with the omega-3s. This was lonely bachelor food, late-night shift worker food, and Depression-era survival food all rolled into one. There was no pretense. You ate sardines because they were there, they were cheap, and they kept you going. Modern hipsters have rediscovered tinned fish, but hillbillies never stopped eating them. Beef and cabbage skillet. Moving to heartier territory, beef and cabbage skillet, the one-pan wonder that stretched a little meat into a lot of meal. During the Depression and through the 1950s, rural families perfected the art of making small amounts of beef feed large families. This skillet dish became a weeknight staple, because cabbage was cheap, grew easily in mountain gardens, and stored well through winter in root cellars. Combined with just a pound of ground beef or chopped beef scraps, it could feed 6 or 8 people. The cooking method built layers of flavor. Ground beef went into a hot cast-iron skillet first, browning until it developed a rich crust and rendered out its fat. Chopped onions joined next, softening in the beef drippings. Then came the cabbage, a whole head chopped into rough chunks, piling high in the skillet until you wondered how it would all fit. But as it cooked down, the cabbage wilted and caramelized, mixing with the beef and onions into a savory, slightly sweet mess. A can of tomatoes often went in for moisture and acidity, along with salt, pepper, and maybe a bay leaf. Everything simmered together until the cabbage was meltingly tender and had absorbed all the meaty flavors. Served over rice or with corn pone, this was a complete meal from minimal ingredients. The cabbage got sweet and silky, the beef provided richness, and the tomatoes added brightness. It's the kind of simple food that tastes better than it has any right to. Succotash. Succotash, the Native American gift to Appalachia that became a hillbilly staple spanning centuries. This dish traces back to the Narragansett word misquatash, meaning broken corn kernels, and was taught to colonial settlers by Native Americans in the 1600s. By the time it reached Appalachian tables in the 1800s, succotash had evolved into a regional comfort food that celebrated summer's bounty. The basic formula remained simple: corn and beans cooked together, but the variations across hollers and families numbered in the hundreds. Traditional hillbilly succotash started with fresh corn cut from the cob, sweet, milky, and bursting with summer flavor. Lima beans joined in, though some cooks used butter beans or pole beans depending on what grew in the garden. Everything went into a pot with butter or bacon drippings, a splash of cream or milk, and simple seasonings of salt and pepper. Some versions added tomatoes, onions, or bell peppers, while others kept it pure and simple. The mixture simmered until the beans were tender and the corn had released its natural starch, creating a slightly creamy, succulent mixture where the sweet corn balanced the mealy, earthy beans. This was harvest food, made when gardens exploded with produce in late summer. Families put it up in jars for winter eating, preserving summer's flavor. Today's frozen succotash in grocery stores is a pale shadow of the real thing made from garden-fresh vegetables. Mock apple pie. Now for pure Depression-era genius, mock apple pie, the dessert that contained exactly 0 apples, but somehow tasted like apple pie anyway. This recipe exploded during the Great Depression, specifically around 1934, when Ritz Crackers printed it on their box. But hillbilly cooks had been making cracker pies long before that, using whatever crackers they could afford to create the illusion of expensive fruit pies. The chemistry was simple but brilliant. Soaked crackers had a texture similar to cooked apples, and with the right spices and sugar syrup, your brain could be convinced it was eating apple pie. The construction was pure trickery. You broke up Ritz crackers or similar butter crackers into large pieces and laid them in a pie crust. Then came the magic syrup. Water boiled with sugar, cream of tartar, lemon juice, cinnamon, and nutmeg until it became a thin syrup that tasted distinctly appley despite containing no fruit. This poured over the crackers, which soaked it up and softened into something eerily similar to apple pie filling in texture. A top crust went on, the whole thing baked until golden, and you had yourself a pie that looked and tasted remarkably like apple pie. Serving this to guests without telling them was considered a fun trick. Most couldn't tell the difference, especially when served warm with a scoop of vanilla ice cream if you were fancy. It's a testament to mountain ingenuity and the power of spices to fool your senses. Possum Pie. Despite the name, Possum Pie contained no possum. Thank goodness, because this was actually a decadent layered dessert. Emerging in the 1950s and 1960s across the rural South, possum pie got its name from the layers that supposedly resembled a possum's coloring, or possibly because it was playing possum by pretending to be one thing while actually being another. This was church supper food at its finest, made when you wanted to show off a little bit and had access to modern convenience ingredients like cream cheese and Cool Whip. The structure was pure mid-century American excess. A pecan and graham cracker crust formed the base, pressed into a pie plate and baked until fragrant and toasted. The first layer was cream cheese beaten with powdered sugar until fluffy, then spread across the cooled crust. Next came chocolate pudding, homemade if you were ambitious, instant if you were practical, creating a rich, dark layer. Some versions included a layer of vanilla pudding too, making it even taller. The whole creation got topped with billows of whipped cream or Cool Whip and garnished with chopped pecans or chocolate shavings. Chilled until firm, it sliced into towering wedges that were almost too rich to finish. This appeared at weddings, holiday gatherings, and any time someone wanted to make an impression. It was called possum, but tasted like heaven. Modern cheesecake has nothing on the architectural ambition of a proper possum pie. Blackberry dumplings. Summer in Appalachia meant one thing: blackberry picking, and blackberry dumplings were the reward for braving thorns and snakes. Wild blackberries grew thick along fence lines, roadsides, and clearings throughout the mountains, free for the picking if you could handle the heat, bugs, and thorny canes that tore at your arms. Families made expeditions in July and August, returning with buckets of dark, jewel-like berries that stained everything purple. Blackberry dumplings were the ultimate way to celebrate this harvest, combining fruit with dough in a way that felt both rustic and special. The process was wonderfully simple. Fresh blackberries went into a pot with sugar and water, brought to a rolling boil until they burst and released their deep purple juice, creating an intensely flavored syrup. While that bubbled away, cooks made a basic dumpling dough from flour, baking powder, milk, and a pinch of salt. Spoonfuls of this dough dropped directly into the boiling berry mixture, where they puffed up and cooked through, absorbing the berry juice and turning violet on the outside. After about 15 minutes of simmering, you had tender, fluffy dumplings floating in thick, sweet tart blackberry sauce. Served warm in bowls with the juice spooned over top, these were pure summer comfort. Some families added a splash of cream or a scoop of vanilla ice cream. Your hand stayed stained purple for days, but it was worth every thorn scratch. Squirrel Stew. Here's where it gets authentically backwoods. Squirrel Stew, the wild game dinner that fed families when money was tight. For generations of Appalachian hunters, squirrel hunting wasn't sport, it was grocery shopping. From the 1800s well into the 1960s, young boys learned to shoot by bringing down squirrels for the supper pot. These small game animals were plentiful, free, and provided lean, flavorful meat that, when cooked right, tasted somewhat like dark meat chicken, but with a nuttier, gamier edge. Squirrel stew was the most practical way to cook them, tenderizing the naturally tough meat while stretching 2 or 3 squirrels into a meal for the whole family. The preparation started with skinning and butchering the squirrels, a skill every mountain kid learned young. The pieces went into a heavy pot with water, salt, and whatever vegetables were available: potatoes, carrots, onions, and sometimes wild foraged ramps or mushrooms. The stew simmered low and slow for hours until the meat fell off the tiny bones and the broth became rich and gamey. Some cooks added flour dumplings at the end, making it even heartier. The finished stew was dark, aromatic, and deeply savory with a complexity that store-bought chicken could never match. Families ate this throughout fall and winter when hunting season was open. It represented self-sufficiency and connection to the land. Most modern Americans would balk at eating squirrel, but for mountain families, it was just protein. Pepperoni Rolls. Back in 1927, Italian immigrant Giuseppe Argiro opened a bakery in Fairmont, West Virginia, right in the heart of coal country. The miners had a problem. They needed lunches that could survive 12-hour shifts in hot, dusty mines without spoiling. Argiro's solution became a West Virginia institution. He took soft bread dough, wrapped it around sticks of pepperoni, and baked them until golden. The pepperoni's natural oils and salt acted as preservatives, while the sealed dough package kept out coal dust and mine grime. You'd roll out simple white bread dough, place a whole 6-inch pepperoni stick in the center, sometimes add a slice of mozzarella, then roll it tight and bake until golden brown. When a miner bit into one deep underground, he got that spicy, greasy, salty punch of meat and bread that made black coffee taste like luxury. This wasn't fancy food. It was survival food that could handle 100-degree tunnels without refrigeration. If you're enjoying this journey through food history, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss future videos. Fried green tomatoes. When frost threatened in September, mountain families stripped their tomato plants of every unripe fruit. Waste wasn't an option. These hard, sour green tomatoes became a staple in lunch pails across Appalachia from the 1890s onward. The preparation was simple but required skill. You'd slice the green tomatoes thick, about a ½ inch, so they wouldn't fall apart. Dip them in buttermilk if you had it, or just water if you didn't, then dredge through cornmeal mixed with salt and pepper. Some families added a little flour to help the coating stick. Into a hot skillet with bacon grease they'd go, frying until each side developed a crispy, golden brown crust. The heat would soften the tomato just enough to create a contrast, crunchy outside, tangy and firm inside. These weren't just clever, they were strategic. Fried green tomatoes could sit at room temperature all morning without getting soggy or spoiling. Loggers and miners would eat them cold, straight from the pail, enjoying that sharp, acidic bite that cut through the heaviness of biscuits and fatback. Stack cake slices. The Appalachian stack cake wasn't just dessert. It was portable wealth in the lunch pail. Dating back to the early 1800s, this cake was made from thin layers of dense, cookie-like rounds stacked with dried apple filling. But here's what made it lunch-worthy. It actually got better with age. Families would bake these cakes a week before they were needed, letting the moisture from the apple filling seep into the dry layers, softening them into something almost fudgy. A mother would cut thick slices and wrap them in wax paper for the lunch pail. Each layer was made from sorghum or molasses-sweetened dough, rolled thin and baked hard, creating rounds that could survive being transported without crumbling. Between each layer went a thick paste of dried apples, cooked down with sugar and spices until it was almost jammy. The beauty was in the preservation. The low moisture content meant it wouldn't mold. The sugar and spice acted as preservatives, and the whole thing could sit in a cool place for weeks. Miners and loggers savored these slices as their midday treat, the dense sweetness providing quick energy and a taste of home in rough camps. Cold biscuits with sorghum. Leftover biscuits never went to waste in the mountains. From the 1880s through the 1960s, families would save the previous night's biscuits for next-day lunches. These weren't the fluffy, buttery southern biscuits you'd find at a restaurant. These were hard-working biscuits made with lard and minimal rising agent, designed to fill stomachs cheaply. By morning, they'd be cold and slightly firm, but that was the point. A worker would split the biscuit in half and drizzle dark sorghum molasses over each side. Sorghum was cheaper than white sugar and provided deep, almost earthy sweetness with a mineral tang that white sugar couldn't match. The thick syrup would soak into the dense biscuit, creating pockets of sweetness throughout. Some folks added a smear of butter if they had it, but most just relied on the sorghum. This combination delivered quick energy from the molasses and staying power from the wheat and lard. Timber workers would eat these standing up, syrup dripping onto their boots, getting that sugar rush before attacking another day of felling trees with handsaws and axes in the steep mountain terrain. Salmon patties. Canned salmon was one of the few luxury proteins mountain families could afford, and they stretched it as far as possible. From the 1920s through the 1960s, salmon patties became a lunch staple. The night before, mothers would open a can of pink salmon, bones and skin included, nothing wasted, and mash it with leftover cornbread or stale breadcrumbs, an egg if available, and a little chopped onion. Form the mixture into patties and fry them in bacon grease until both sides developed a crispy, golden crust. By morning, these patties were cold and firm, perfect for the lunch pail. They wouldn't fall apart, wouldn't spoil in moderate temperatures, and delivered that fish oil richness that bodies needed. The bones, mashed in with everything else, provided calcium that mountain diets often lacked. Workers would eat them with their hands, the crispy exterior giving way to that soft, fishy center. Some folks made them small, like silver dollar pancakes. Others preferred them larger, like hamburger patties. Either way, they represented prosperity in a can. Ocean fish making its way to landlocked hollows, providing protein when deer season was over and the chickens weren't laying. Dried apple slices. Simple, portable, and nearly indestructible. From the late 1700s onward, Appalachian families dried apples every fall as insurance against winter and spring hunger. They'd core and slice apples thin, usually golden delicious or wine saps, and string them on thread or lay them on screens in the sun, sometimes in the rafters near the wood stove. After weeks of drying, the slices would shrink to leathery rings, concentrated with sugar and flavor. These went into every lunch pail. Workers would chew them slowly, rehydrating them slightly with saliva, releasing that intense apple sweetness. They were tough. You couldn't just bite through them. You had to gnaw and suck, making each piece last. The chewing motion itself was satisfying, giving jaw muscles something to do during breaks. These dried apples provided quick energy from natural sugars, required no refrigeration, wouldn't spoil for months, and weighed almost nothing. Loggers would carry pounds of them into week-long camps. Miners kept them in their pockets. Children would get a handful for school. In lean times, these apple rings might be the only sweet thing a family had, making them precious beyond their simple ingredients. Pickled eggs and cornbread. When chickens were laying heavily in spring and summer, mountain families pickled dozens of eggs to preserve them for leaner months. They'd hard-boil fresh eggs, peel them, and pack them into jars filled with vinegar brine, sometimes with beet juice for color, sometimes with hot peppers for bite. After a week in the brine, these eggs transformed into tangy, firm protein bombs. For lunch, a worker would grab 2 or 3 pickled eggs and a chunk of cornbread. The combination was strategic. The sharp, acidic punch of the vinegar egg cut through the dense, slightly sweet cornbread, creating a balanced meal that sat well in the stomach. The eggs provided protein and fat. The cornbread delivered carbohydrates, and the vinegar aided digestion during heavy labor. From the 1880s through the 1960s, this pairing was standard in coal camps and tobacco fields. The eggs were sour, salty, and had that distinctive pickled firmness. The yolk would be slightly dry and crumbly. Men would eat them whole, alternating bites of egg with bites of crumbling cornbread, washing everything down with creek water or weak coffee from a thermos. Bean sandwiches. Yes, beans between bread. This wasn't a joke, it was serious fuel. The night before, leftover pinto beans would be mashed slightly with a fork, creating a thick paste that could spread. In the morning, this bean paste went between 2 slices of bread, usually that thick, homemade farm bread that could handle moisture without disintegrating. No lettuce, no tomato, no condiments, just beans and bread. The beans provided protein and fiber, the bread gave carbohydrates, and the whole thing could survive hours in a lunch pail without falling apart. Some families added a little bacon grease to the beans for moisture and flavor. Others included a slice of raw onion for bite. From the 1900s through the 1960s, bean sandwiches sustained workers who couldn't afford meat daily. The sandwich was filling, cheap, and surprisingly satisfying. The beans' earthy, creamy texture contrasted with the bread's density. It stuck to your ribs, as the saying went, meaning it kept you full for hours of hard labor. Modern folks might turn their noses up, but to a tobacco farmer in 1935, this sandwich represented a full belly and the energy to finish a 12-hour day in the fields.